dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. This is Wednesday after Super Tuesday, and as we see, Trump did pretty well. Cruz did pretty well. Rubio, not so well. Why isn't the establishment getting behind Ted Cruz? Because Ted Cruz, again, he will more pander to the right. They look at Rubio kind of like they did Ryan as a establishment candidate that will pander to the left just as much as the right. When we look at, Trump coming up in this whole field when it comes to the Republican field, again, like I said, I think it really shows not maybe the most intelligent revolution, but it is the attempt to overthrow the establishment within the Republican Party, which is why it has garnered support from so-called liberty activists, media, and I'll be getting into some of that. And I wanted to play the Ron Paul Liberty Report from yesterday, Super Tuesday, picking a new boss, and then we'll get into this, and we also have some news out of the Libertarian Party, and we'll get into quite a bit of the politics coming up for 2016. And then second hour, we will get into other domestic news and foreign news that relates to your freedom. But I do want to get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report first before we get into a lot of articles I have today. So let's go ahead and play this. Ron Paul Liberty Report, Super Tuesday, picking a new boss.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Do you know what day today is?
Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday. And, as many as elections I can remember, the elections have always been said the most important election in the history of the country. And of course, this is the most important election ever. At least for this year, it's the most important election. But today is the most important event of the election of this whole year, because it's Super Tuesday, a lot of votes up. But, if you really dissect those numbers out, it isn't quite as dramatic as they claim. There's too many of those super delegates and too much goes on at conventions. So there's a lot of room. But anyway, the perceptions are that this is a very, very big day. But let's assume and give them a little bit of credibility that a lot is going to be decided today. But I've sort of come to the point of thinking that about all they're going to do, if it does have an effect, is picking a new boss. And then the new boss just replaces the old boss. And I claim that either side, they're just picking a boss. It's a different description of the boss, whether it's a Hillary or a Trump. But there's still going to be a boss with the absence of any serious consideration, with any of the very important issues.
And even with the Sanders as a new boss, the boss is going to take more of your money and do with it things that you don't like, and there's no way around it.
And but when it comes to issues, most people say, "Well, what are you guys talking about? How can Hillary be anywhere like Trump?" Well, in many ways, perception-wise, different. Like she's a woman and he's a man. That's a difference.
That is different, yeah.
But what about foreign policy? I can't think of any major things. It's the way maybe things are to be handled, but even that is not a whole lot different. She's such a neocon and she's pro-war. Trump, we're not exactly sure of, but he's part of the crowd that says, boy, if I'm president, or no, when I'm president, I am going to rebuild our military. The military's been torn down. So he's part of that. And he uses language very often where he talks about, oh, yeah, we'll bomb him and do this. And so I don't think foreign policy would change.
It doesn't seem like, he has made some encouraging sounds. I like the fact that he said Bush was a liar when it comes to Iraq. I think that was great. But then it did sound good that he wouldn't go into Libya or Syria. But then he says he'd tear up the Iran deal and go back to square one. And so there's an inconsistency there.
And he'd probably revive the Cold War, maybe not so much with Russia, but with China. Maybe, yeah. He wants to stir up trouble there and put on sanctions and put on tariffs with China. But my big concern about what's happening in the election is that they do ignore the important issues on purpose. And this election, the danger of this election is a distraction. It's a pretense that they're talking about something important and thinking that they're dealing with it. And I don't think they do at all, because I think the most important issues that drive people are economic issues. And so who are our leading candidates right now? We have Hillary and Sanders, and they talk about the economy, but they want more government, more free stuff, and everything will be okay. And if you're rich, you're automatically a bad person, and therefore we have to tax you more. But the middle class is suffering. But they don't talk about why the middle class is suffering, because of monetary policy. So it's an economic issue. But then you come along and say, well, Trump has a different approach. Well, if you can figure out what his approach is, he's not talking about Austrian economics. He's not talking about getting rid of the Federal Reserve or reining in the Federal Reserve. So I don't see them addressing the subject of. They're addressing the subject of anger, but I don't think they understand the anger. Even the revolutions around the world, usually start with people can't afford food, or the gasoline prices went up too high, and the people finally say, hey, wait, we can't live with this, and then there's a revolt.
And that probably is the appeal of Trump to a lot of middle America who's seen its incomes diminished, shrinking over the years. And he's, I think, the only one speaking to them. He's not, as you point out, offering necessarily solutions, but he's the only one recognizing there's a huge group of people that are getting left behind and are angry, very angry.
I saw an interesting statistic today that pointed out that, the 1%ers are vulnerable, and we attack them when they get rich because of government and the Fed. But if you take a $38,000 income in the United States It's the highest 1% of the whole world. When you average everybody in, you're in the 1%. If you're $38,000. So if you're a true socialist, you say, well, I'm an international socialist. So we have the redistributed wealth. So we have to take the people who have $38,000 instead of talking about how do you get more production? Why aren't we producing? Why don't we have a large middle class? And why do we have so much government involved? But there's no candidate that represents the position of saying that what we have to do is reduce the size and scope of government. We should cut spending, and it's government debt that is the problem. But have you heard Trump say much about we have to do some radical cuts on anything?
Cut spending. Well, no one wants to hear that. Everyone's hoping to get some more free stuff. Yeah. But you point out the economic problems. We were talking before the show about this interesting article that John Whitehead of Rutherford Institute wrote about meet the new boss, same as the old boss, and he points out we were going to talk about this 4,500 federal crimes. And how many federal regulations was it?
But he has identified 4,500 federal crimes. I think the Constitution identified 5 or 6. That are really truly a constitutionally federal crime. But he says there's over 400,000 rules. Now that's a bit of a burden. I mean, have those rules really helped the consumer? Has it helped the consumer on buying prescription drugs? No, or are those rules more likely to protect drug companies' monopolies and make it so that they can gouge us on prescription drugs and they get monopolies protected, from the FDA and all these things. So the regulations, I've always argued, and that the regulations are written by the interests, the special interests. So banking regulations are written by the banking industry, usually by the ones who have the most money to do the lobbying, to write them in favor of the big banks. And drug companies write a lot of the laws there. It's never written by the consumer. And frequently, it isn't the consumer that comes in and begs and pleads for more of these regulations. They might want access or something, but it's so often it's the big companies that want protectionism. But that is not being discussed here. And of course, the approach is although different, they're very similar. One group wants socialism and progressivism, and the other wants a government which is referred to as populism and nationalism and sanctions and tariffs and blame. Who are you going to blame? Sanders blames the 1%. They're too rich. We have to do something. But Trump comes along and he blames Mexico and Mexican citizens and China. Well, yeah, it's involved, but do they look to themselves or ourselves and look at our own policy and what it means to have the reserve currency of the world and how we live beyond our mean and have to borrow all this money? No, they never do this. It's the Chinese. Trump, boy, I'll tell you what, I'll take hold of those Chinese and teach them a lesson. So it's still, they want to be a boss, and libertarians aren't out there to have a boss. So that's why libertarians feel so lonely now is we don't need another boss, and the boss is opposite of liberty.
And even if he might be right about businesses moving to China, one of the reasons they move to China are all these regulations we just talked about. It's easier to open a business in a communist country than it is here in the U.S. Yeah. But one thing that Trump does attack that I have to admit some sympathy, and that's the media. And we were talking about the role of the media in elections before the show, and it's such an important issue.
This condemnation of China because he wants to bring jobs back and get back in manipulation. But who do these cheap products benefit? It's the poor people. If Trump had his way, the price of goods that poor people can afford now will go up. The same way the intent is, out of fairness and humanitarian instincts, $7 an hour is like slavery, so we have to make it $10 or $15. But look at what's happened to Walmart. Walmart's in trouble, and they raise the wages, and they're going to have to raise prices. They close down some of their stores. People lose jobs. So as bad as Walmart is, they produce low products and give it a lot of jobs, but some do-gooder planner say, well, we have to dictate the price. You know, we can't let the market decide that $7 if somebody voluntarily comes in and works for $7 an hour and they're working for a company that provides goods to be cheap and they buy them from China. You know, if people understood liberty, they wouldn't be so upset. But they also, if we had a free market, there wouldn't be such a challenge to the economy. But to blame that there's too much freedom and that's why the economy is so weak and therefore we need more government, that's where the real fallacy is. But it's on both sides and they're both want to be boss. Mm-hmm. And my vote is for get rid of the boss.
And we talked about the Whitehead article, and his main point was, here are the things that are not going to be decided in this election. And they're really fundamental things. But this is one statistic that really jumped out at me, and I just think it's fascinating. Since 2001, Americans spend $10.5 million an hour, every hour, for military occupations overseas.
Yeah, and which one are you going to vote for because you know they're going to reduce the waste in the military-industrial complex?
Think about the destruction of the economy with this money just burning away. What could be used for?
And because they don't talk about the nature of money and how important a monetary system is. Right now, they're getting away with economic murder because you know, we can print, we can borrow, and foreign governments still take this money and they finance things. So it's such a distraction. And they say, well, yeah, Ron, but this monetary thing, it's too complex. People don't understand it. But I think that is very misleading because I think people understand money. If you talk about, you know, just a clear understanding of what it would be like if you try to start a new country and give the power to a few people in this new society. Well, we want you guys to start printing the money and put a number on there and tell us what it's worth. It's total insanity. And this whole idea, none of them have brought up this idea of the insanity of the Federal Reserve right now and saying, well, we want to stimulate the economy. People have to spend more money. Governments have to spend more money. And it's not working so far. Our theories aren't doing so well, but maybe we need more of it. So if low interest rates has helped us in the past to get us out of a recession and businesses start operating again, they don't realize that it comes to an end. So they go 10, 9, 8, 7, all the way. One-time interest rates were 21%, and they have gone steadily down since 1980. Now they're down to 0, and they're talking about, well, maybe you have to be honest. We're going to charge people a penalty to put money in the bank, and on and on. Some of this stuff, the average person is waking up, but if they never hear it from people, from the politicians that are running, but I would think common sense could prevail. One of the nicest compliments that I ever got, you know, campaigning was, you know, when you explain this, it's just common sense, and I think it is. I don't think it's real complicated. If you want to have complicated economics, look at Keynesian economic models and think of the theoretical mathematical formulas that they have to predict human action, which is a total impossibility.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't mind, if you'll indulge me, I wouldn't mind reading the last sentence or two from Whitehead's article, because I thought it was a great summation of this great big Super Tuesday. He said, Americans will have to decide for themselves whether they prefer dangerous freedom to peaceful slavery. One thing is for sure, the reassurance ritual of voting is not going to advance freedom one iota.
Well, that's my sentiment. Maybe that's why he's our friend and we quote him, because we're on the same wavelength, and that's my position on this election. It's not going to make any difference. And if Trump gets in or Hillary gets in, I know nobody wants to believe that, because this ruins all the fun. It ruins the fun of the media. What fun would it be? Oh, they're about the same and nothing is going to change. That's so boring. So they have to dramatize this and draw the lines and have battles between them. And see, Trump Trump is a demagogue, and they all are, and they're tempted to do this. But this whole thing is also, the pot is stirred by the media running back and forth. Oh, do you know what he said? And back and forth, and it gets people's attention. But it's a distraction from dealing with the real issues, with the truth of things. It distracts from talking about, non-interventionist foreign policy and why we ought to just get ourselves out of all these countries. It distracts from monetary policy. It distracts from free market economic, and it distracts, unfortunately, from the whole issue of liberty. And so far, there is no evidence that this election is going to result in more liberty for the people. But I'll tell you one thing. If there's any consequence of the stirring of the younger generation that I witnessed, there will be a chance for liberty to be returned, because there's a lot of people still interested, and it will become very obvious to a lot of people soon that, yes, we will be much better off if we live in a free country rather than a totalitarian country, and it's up for grabs right now. But unfortunately, this particular election isn't going to move us in one direction or another. That takes a little bit harder work of people hearing the explanation of why liberty is so far superior to tyranny. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report. Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check them out. Subscribe. Now, when we look at the field that we have, I've told people before, the only even distant hope I have of anybody that might be a liberty candidate was Rand Paul. Now, it's one of those things, you get people going, Ted Cruz is a Tea Party. Tea Party don't mean nothing, because Tea Party, that's been hijacked. And we know that. There's plenty of evidence out there. That happened early on. The sprouts of the Tea Party came from the push to nominate Ron Paul for the 2008 election. And after that, you had what were considered insiders going to these events and bringing their audience along with them. And slowly it kind of pushed a lot of the Ron Paul supporters out of it. The ones that didn't basically co-op onto the new platform that was being created. And, the Koch brother money starts popping up. It's one of those things that it was in some ways slow, but in some ways actually quick conversion of the Tea Party movement to try to draw people that were more constitutional or libertarian, trying to draw them on to candidates that would continue to progress these type of ideas that they wanted. A lot of it being the deregulation. But when there's big money and big business behind the funding, the deregulation is more of measures put in place to protect big business, not necessary all business or small business. So you see where all that comes from. And when you look at Donald Trump, you have to wonder, what is the true motives behind what he says and what he does? Because then you get remarks where he talks about, I'm a chameleon, and I can, people go, well, he just wants to do that way he can get more of the left to vote for him too. And I I don't know. I don't see that. I think that he's been a chameleon by um, going the conservative route. But, again, I can be wrong. Um, Media Matters actually put out an article. Um, Trump allied Fox judge and 9/11 truther Andrew Napolitano, probably Trump's number one pick for Supreme Court. Again, this is Media Matters for America. Very, very leftist media outlet. Very, very leftist. But it says here Donald Trump ally Roger Stone said that Fox News senior judicial analyst Andrew Napolitano is probably Trump's number one pick for the U.S. Supreme Court. Napolitano believes in 9/11 conspiracy theories, is a contrarian on President Abraham Lincoln's legacy, and doesn't believe the right to vote is a fundamental right. Stone is a disruptible political dirty trickster who was recently banned from CNN for sexist and racist tweets. Stone worked as a paid advisor for Trump's campaign last year and is currently heading a pro-Trump super PAC that is trying to stop the Republican establishment from stealing the presidential nomination from Donald Trump. Stone has said he and Trump talk on semi-regular basis. During a February 28th interview, conspiracy radio host Alex Jones introduced Stone by saying he had just spoken to Trump for 45 minutes. Stone said on WIOD's Furman R. Amandi this morning he spoke to the candidate last night. On Genesis Communication Network's The Power Hour, host Joyce Riley told Stone, I asked a lot of the people that I respect, who would you like to see Trump have as a vice president? And the overwhelming majority was Judge Andrew Napolitano from Fox News. Stone responded that would be a superb choice. On the other hand, I frankly think that he's probably Trump's number one pick for the U.S. Supreme Court, where he'd probably go down as one of our greatest justices. Which I agree with that statement. He added, I can't think of anybody who would be more fitting replacement for the late Judge Nino Scolari, the Judge Napolitano. I think that's exactly the right spot for him. Napolitano, according, again, Media Matters for America, Napolitano is a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. He once told Alex Jones that it's hard for me to believe that the World Trade Center Building 7 came down by itself. A central tenet of 9/11 conspiracy theories. Napolitano also claimed that 20 years from now, people will look at 9/11 the way they look at the assassination of JFK today. It couldn't possibly have been done the way the government told us. Jones is a leading conspiracy theorist who is considered a founding father of the 9/11 conspiracy movement. Trump's campaign has been courting Jones and his audience, with Trump praising Jones for his amazing reputation. Napolitano said Jones is his dear friend and was a regular guest on his program. Napolitano said he is a contrarian on President Abraham Lincoln's legacy, bemoaned the fact that Lincoln has been mythologized and accused Lincoln of having set up about one of the most murderous war in American history over slavery rather than allowing it to die, since it was dying a natural death. Fact checkers have called Napolitano out for botching facts, including about the Constitution during the Bundy Ranch standoff. Napolitano claimed the Constitution simply does not authorize the federal government to own any of this land in the western states. That received a pants-on-fire false ruling from PolitiFact's Pundit Fact. Napolitano is anti-choice, having compared Roe versus Wade to the philosophical argument underlying the Holocaust and declaring it comparable to the Dred Scott decision during a segment discussing the right to vote. I want to call them out on this crap about the Constitution simply does not authorize the federal government to own any of this land in the western states. It does not. It absolutely does not. And when they try to use this Supreme Court opinion on the fact it does not hold its ground, again, constitutional lawyers have come out and talked about this, which I played a clip on one of the broadcasts here, and it talked about the fact that the only constitutional allowance for the government to own land is Washington, D.C. in a 10-mile square radius, and that any other land that may be held by the federal government may be held as territory in a trust for the implement of eventually becoming a state. Once the property becomes, or the territory becomes a state, then it can no longer ever go back into the hands of the federal government, even in a trust, to eventually become state. Therefore, that all that federal land should fall under the state's jurisdiction. If it's going to be a refuge, wildlife refuge, it needs to be under the state. If it's going to be a park, it needs to be under the state. But they've construed that to mean whatever they decide it's going to mean. And we know that. And then you have them taking property or, manipulating prices and getting property that they want and, forcing people off their land by making it where they can't operate their land anymore. And it gets to a point where they get the property for damn near free. Not completely, but again, it's our money in the first place, taxpayer money. So, they get this property and then they can lease it to these private companies for solar farms. Oh, it's in the national interest, or it's a utility that we need, and we'll mine the resources. And when you see the value of the natural resources in that area, they rip people off, and then they're making money after they've ripped those people off. So it's pretty interesting. But this, again, media matters for America. Yeah. I have one here from Truth of Media. GOP Senator Ben Sass says he will vote third party if Trump wins nomination. In an open letter on Facebook, which called Donald Trump supporters well-meaning and right to be angry, Republican U.S. Senator from Nebraska, Ben Sasse, said that he cannot support Donald Trump, and that if the billionaire real estate investor wins the GOP primary, Sasse will look for a third-party candidate to support. Please understand, I'm not an establishment Republican. I will never support Hillary Clinton. I'm a movement conservative who was elected over the objections of the GOP establishment. My current answer for who I would support is a hypothetical matchup between Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton is neither of them. I sincerely hope we select one of the other GOP candidates, but if Donald Trump ends up as the GOP nominee, conservatives will need to find a third option, said Senator Sasse in his Sunday Facebook post. Given what we know about him today, here's what I'm at, or where I'm at. If Donald Trump becomes a Republican nominee, my expectation is that I will look for some third-party candidate, a conservative option, a constitutionalist, concluded Sasse. Freshman Senator Sasse was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2014 and has fashioned himself as an anti-Obamacare candidate during his campaign, according to the Washington Post. Senator Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and former Republican Alaska Governor Sarah Palin campaigned for Sasse's candidacy during the 2014 Nebraska Republican U.S. Senate primary. Sasse said the loyalty to a political party should be contingent on it remaining useful for the promotion of the core beliefs of its supporters. If our party is no longer working for the things we believe in, like defending the sanctity of life, stopping Obamacare, protecting the Second Amendment, etc., then people of good conscience should stop supporting that party until it is reformed, he added. The senator from Nebraska also fired out a round of tweets critical of Trump on Sunday. First one, in America, law is king, but have you noticed that, or notice how Trump uses the word reign like he thinks he's running for king? It's creepy, actually. Second one, President of the United States, POTUS's job is not mindless. Give me a second. It's not mindless shouting the word strong. Putin has been strongly bombing civilian populations in Syria the last month. Trump praises Putin, China's crackdown in Tiananmen Square, and speaks of opening up libel laws so he can sue critics. He doesn't get America. The presidency is not our national embodiment of Nazi will. It's just one of three co-equal branches of government. And that was at truthofmedia.com. And then you have GOP candidate, this out of reason.com, or GOP representative Tom Massey. I don't think there's a good outcome in 2016. Again, reason.com. Libertarian Republican won't endorse anyone for president now that Rand Paul's out. Wants an ideological dating manual for new congressmen and says technology, not politics, will set us free. Quote, now that Rand Paul is out of the race, the libertarian voice is gone, says Representative Thomas Massey, Republican from Kentucky. The one argument for libertarians to vote Republican that still remains is the Supreme Court. Other than that, I really can't see very much endearing for a libertarian in these Republican candidates. Nick Gillespie sat down with the three-term congressman during the International Students for Liberty Conference to discuss the 2016 election, Apple versus surveillance state, and why engineers, not politicians, keep them optimistic about the future. And I'm going to play that clip right now.
I'm really pessimistic. I don't think there is a good outcome in 2016.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Congressman Thomas Massey, a Republican from Kentucky. Congressman Massey, thanks for talking to us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nick.
We are at the International Students for Liberty Conference. Tell us, what are the most important votes that are coming up for a libertarian-leaning Republican between now and the 2016 election?
I think we can force some votes on the privacy issue. I've been able to force about 4 votes. In fact, last year and the year before, I forced a vote on an appropriations bill to shut down government forcing companies to install backdoors in their products. Now, that amendment was attached to an appropriations bill that got thrown away, and then an omnibus was later done. But it's important to get the votes, because then you can see where the congressmen stand.
What did you think about in a recent Republican candidates debate, all of the existing...
The libertarian voice is gone, and I think it's also untethered some of those candidates to become more neoconish.
In 2016, what are the prospects for growing the number of congressmen and senators who, like yourself, are serious about shrinking the size, scope, and spending of government?
I think the prospects are good. There's a guy in Indiana, Jim Banks, who's been good on the food freedom issue in the state Senate, so I've decided to back him. And there are other candidates out there. The real question for me, or my goal now, or my mission in life, is when the good guys get elected, is trying to keep them from becoming zombies when they get to D.C. Because, we get probably 12 to 20 guys every cycle that, they run on what they believe and they believe what they run on, and then they get there and they sell out within about 6 months.
What are the ways that you either keep them from selling out or becoming zombified? What kind of, is it education? Is it support? Is it what?
Congressmen get led to a place they never want to go, and then they find themselves there, and they find themselves trying to argue that that's the right position. And so if you can explain to them how they're going to get led in those directions, how they're going to get whipped into voting for things they never intended to vote for, if you can, it's almost sort of like a dating manual for adolescents. Like, when this happens and you feel uncomfortable, there's a reason you feel uncomfortable. Just, they sort of need that dating manual when they get there so they don't end up in places they don't want to be.
In terms of the presidential race, what's the best outcome that you're hoping for in 2016?
I'm really pessimistic. I don't think there is a good outcome in 2016.
So,
I would say the one argument for libertarians to vote Republican that still remains is the Supreme Court nominees. Other than that, I really can't see very much endearing for a libertarian in these Republican candidates.
So, you're not going to support or you're not going to endorse anybody before the election, or will you vote for the eventual Republican nominee?
I'm not going to endorse any of the remaining candidates, and in Kentucky, I'm going to vote for Rand because he's still on the ballot. And, we'll just wait and see what happens in November.
We're at the Students for Liberty Conference. What was the most important issue to you in your student days? And is it still a big deal for you? And if not, what has replaced it?
My gateway issue into liberty was gun rights, because I grew up in a rural area where everybody had guns. And then I went to college and realized that people in college wanted to ban these things. I went to college in Massachusetts. And so that was sort of my gateway issue into the liberty movement. And as I thought through that, I was able to think through these other issues.
And the gun issue, over the past 20, 30 years, is actually Second Amendment rights have really seen an enormous increase in their legal standing as well as their popularity in many ways, don't you think?
The gun rights movement or political effort is probably something everybody should study, because they're fighting above their weight class. And when I was young, if you wanted to carry a concealed weapon, you had to be a sheriff's deputy. It was virtually unheard of to be able to do that. And now you can do that in most states with minimal hoops to jump through. In 1994, they banned so-called assault weapons, and we all thought, and high-capacity magazines, we thought we'd never see those again. And here we are, they're the most popular firearm in the United States.
And crime and gun-related crime and violence is down. So
that's important, yeah. Every state that has made these changes, or municipality, to be more liberal, if you will, in terms of letting people own guns, they've seen a reduction in crime.
What makes you pessimistic these days, and what makes you optimistic?
I guess I'm most pessimistic about the national debt and the fact that when interest rates return to normal levels, 5% interest on $20 trillion is $1 trillion a year. That's bigger than our military budget. It's actually our entire discretionary spending combined.
And we're spending about $4 trillion a year. So if it goes up to that, that's 25% off the top is just going to pay money we don't have.
Well, if the $4 trillion, 3 of that is for entitlements. There's $1 trillion that funds the things that people think about, like roads and bridges, NASA, the military. That $1 trillion will wipe out all of the things that Congress actually votes on, because I don't see any will to change the entitlement programs right now.
So then what makes you optimistic?
What makes me optimistic is technology and invention and the human spirit to improve our own lives. My background is an engineer, have 29 patents, I've invented things, and when people say, will our children be better off than we were, I say, well, absolutely they will, because society doesn't forget the things it invented, and we invent more things. And so, we've got smartphones now, and we've got eBay and things that have really made life better for us thanks to technology. And So when people say, are we going to be better off, I say yes, but it's going to be due to the engineers, not the politicians.
Well, we will leave it there. Thank you so much. We've been talking with Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky. For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie at the International Students for Liberty Conference.
Again, Reason TV, Reason.com, Reason TV on YouTube. And again, they got the article and stuff at Reason.com. Now, I definitely agree in the fact that when we look at technology, it does help free a population when they have access to technology and information that can break them from the cycle. You know, the web has been that way. And I might not be with Alex Jones on supporting Trump. I'm also not trying to wage a war against Trump, but I am going to call out things he's said in the past and hold his feet to the fire when it comes to if he gets the nomination, becomes president, that he doesn't become an authoritarian, that he looks at what freedom is and institutes more libertarian and constitutional things rather than authoritarian things that will always turn around and bite us in the butt. So, you know, again, not waging war, just calling out things that I see and the way things come across that he's saying that don't seem freedom loving to me. Now, I have another article here I wanted to get to. This one deals with Rand Paul not attending CPAC. This out of the Washington Post. One of the conservative political action conference's more rambunctious traditions will end this year, as Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky will skip the annual event to focus on politics in his home state. For the first time in 10 years, no member of the Paul political family will be organizing supporters at the biggest annual gathering on the right. He was never planning to go, explained Paul strategist Doug Stepford. He was always going to be focused on the caucuses, either as a candidate or a voter. CPAC begins Wednesday and ends Friday. When he was still running for president, Paul successfully and expensively campaigned for the Republican Party of Kentucky to replace its May primary with a March 5th caucus. The idea initially was to bring more attention to the state and allow Paul to run for the presidency without leaving his Senate seat. Kentucky law would have forbade him appearing on the same ballot for two offices. As a senator seeking re-election, Paul is planning to give a speech at Republican dinner on Friday in his home county, then show up for Saturday's caucuses. That will change the tenure of CPAC, a place where former Texas Representative Ron Paul first got a sense of his presidential campaign's appeal with a low-key 2007 appearance that filled a small ballroom. Every year after that, his libertarian flock took up more and more of the CPAC ballroom, changing the tenure of events, heckling Dick Cheney and anti-gay activists, holding anti-war and anti-Federal Reserve forums in spare rooms. In 2010 and 2011, Ron Paul's supporters handily won the event's high turnout straw poll. In 2013, 2014, and 2015, Rand Paul won them. This year, he won't compete, and the official Paulian presence will be smaller. The Campaign for Liberty, the 501c4 founded after Ron Paul's campaign in 2008, is not co-sponsoring CPAC this year. The pro-Paul Young Americans for Liberty will have a booth, but has not focused on how to recruit and turn out supporters, according to Yale President Jeff Frazee. Since quitting the presidential race, Rand Paul has not really sought to grab back the media megaphone. He gave his first post-primary interview to Rare.us, Jack Hunter, a former speechwriter who resigned when his old and renounced writings as the Southern Avenger were revealed by the Washington Free Beacon. But Paul has otherwise remained quiet. Even his former rivals pick up his critiques of frontrunner Donald Trump. Every remaining GOP candidate is scheduled to speak at CPAC, as well as Carly Fiorina. I can't ever pronounce her last name right. Who dropped out of the GOP race a week after Rand Paul. Again, that was at the Washington Post. And again, that's kind of a big thing for how CPAC has went for so many years now. Again, when the original modern day Tea Party first really got its kickoff with Rand Paul running back in 2007, we were pushing Ron Paul in 2006 and 2007. So it was something that had been brewing for a while. Pun not intended, but good pun for that. And then after the 2008 race, that's when you started seeing a lot of the organizations. You get these, 4 or 5 people that all of a sudden join, and then they go, "We need to make it official." A lot of the original people are like, "Who are these people?" Well, they seem to know what they're talking about. We can do this, this, and this, and then all of a sudden, they tend to go a little bit more establishment way. And a lot of times what I've seen is the only people left in a lot of these cases are the older crowds that are constitutionalists, but they seem to be just tricked into voting whoever Tea Party supports. Remember, Rubio was a Tea Party candidate. So if that tells you anything, it should. Now, I do want to get on to if I can. This is kind of a long clip, not real long, but I do want to play up to just over half of this. So that'll make it kind of short. So, but this was Ron Paul at the Mises Institute. What's ahead? is the title of this one. Mises Media, or Mises.org. Mises Media on YouTube again. So I want to get into this, and I'm going to play again just a little over half, and we'll get into the last of the politics, and then we'll move ahead with some other news, some of it being about Apple. We got some more news covering that, and we'll get into some of the foreign news too. So here we go. What's ahead, Ron Paul, Mises Media.
But what you might not be as familiar with is the story of another doctor, Michael Keller, who's with us here today, was a student, an undergraduate student at the University of Houston in the early 1970s. And in the student body there, he agitated to have Ludwig von Mises come and speak on the University of Houston campus. And he was finally successful in convincing his fellow student government types to allow that to happen. And as a result of that fateful day, a young obstetrician in Lake Jackson, Texas, was able to drive up to University of Houston and hear Ludwig von Mises speak. And had he not been able to do that, he may not be the Ron Paul that we know today. So, Dr. Keller, thanks so much for bringing Mises to Houston. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I get started, I want to introduce another important attendee here today. That is my wife, Carol. Yay! And also, I want to mention the fact that both Jeff and Lou had a similar position when they worked in the congressional office. And each one was a chief executive officer for the congressional office, and they ended up not believing in more government while we were there. They came out believing in a lot less after they were exposed to what we had up there. Also, I think you heard from another former member of the congressional staff that works closely with me now, and that's Daniel McAdams. Daniel is a co-host with me on the Ron Paul Liberty Report, the internet programming that I do, as well as he has a website and runs the Institute, the executive director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, which is something that I consider very, very important and also growing rapidly. So he's done an excellent job in that, because we can't do much in this world. We don't have a policy, at least design, where the American people have a choice that maybe peace is an option rather than carpet bombing. Now, Lou or Jeff, I guess, wrote on the program that my title of my talk is What's Ahead, and I think that's pretty important to anticipate it, but we have to know where we're coming from as well. One thing I think about when we think, what is ahead for us, and how can you predict what happens in the various civilizations over the many centuries? And even in our lifetime, certainly in the 20th century, the most onerous of civilizations and empires was the Soviet Empire, and it came to an end. Now, the important characteristic of the end of the Soviet Empire was the fact that we didn't need a nuclear exchange. It disintegrated from within. And I think this is basically true. Outside forces have something to do with it, all the way back to the Roman Empire, but basically empires, good or bad, disintegrate from within.
So I believe that is what our contention has to be right now, is what is happening to our country from within. And actually, it's very encouraging. They're disintegrating. It's giving us an opportunity. We don't have to go to war with them. They're going to self-destruct. Keynesianism is coming to an end. All they have to do now is dictate to us that every bank has to give us, will be required to have negative interest and get rid of cash. And I think finally the American people will wake up and maybe revolt against this insanity. You know, throughout history, and history is rather short, human history, recorded history is probably 5,000 years, and it's vaguely recorded back then. I was trying to find out the exact date the Ten Commandments were written, and you really can't find. You can't even get the date exactly when Moses brought down the tablets with the Ten Commandments. But even then, when you go back, you'll find out that a lot of those principles were even known with the Assyrians 200 or 300 years before Moses issued the Ten Commandments. But one thing that seems to have been the motivation there is to set some rules. Civilization was coming about. It was rather primitive, but they knew they had to have some rules for the people in order to survive. And if you look at what the basic rules were and what they were trying to design, very, very libertarian. And it basically, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, and don't murder. And it's found in most of the great religions. And it was designed, of course, to limit the hostilities and the violence of individuals to bring about civilization. And, of course, the government was supposed to be very much involved in this. And that is where we come up short, because the government hasn't done a very good job in doing this. We've seen maybe the reversal of that. But, we had the Ten Commandments established, and the move on generally over the many centuries was to see if we could develop, the human race could develop a set of standards for tranquility and peace, and try to curtail the power of government. So a major event occurred in 1215 with the Magna Carta, establishing, that we, have, that governments can't hold us, and governments should be held responsible to the same laws. And this was a significant event. It wasn't the event of all history, but it suggested that the kings had to live under the same laws that the people lived under. And the British followed this to some degree and tried to improve on that over the many years. Now, another significant date, from my viewpoint, occurred when the people got disgusted for various reasons what was going on in Europe and in Britain and the different places. So they heard about America and they wanted to come to America. And the one particular settlement that I think stands out in history that we should pay attention to was the Plymouth Colony in 1620. And it was a bad deal. I mean, they came over, and the percentage of people that died was horrendous even after they got here. But they developed a system of pure socialism, collectivism. Everybody worked together, and whoever needed to eat, they would take the food. And lo and behold, the people weren't working very well, and they weren't doing well. So Bradford finally comes along, and he has this brilliant idea. It had been floating around a bit about that time. He said, let's give up on this. This not have socialism. This is a new country. What we want to do is allot property rights to certain people, and you're on your own. Go what you want and raise what you want. And lo and behold, to their tremendous surprise, there was great productivity. People produced more than they needed. And then they automatically started taking care of the people who weren't capable of raising their own crops. And it was in many ways burying in our early history the concept of socialism. And of course, in our early history, there was much more individualism, and there was much more incentives built into it. And we were moving into an age of thinking about capitalism and Adam Smith and these other events. And that actually went pretty well, but it was really established in 1776, another bold move on the part of our ancestors to put together and make a declaration of independence for the individuals, emphasize the individual. And this was one thing that Murray Rothbard had pointed out, that one of the reasons why individuals were considered important, and he gave credit to Christianity and the importance of the individual. And in that sense, Christianity did have an influence, on our culture and our society. But this was a major event, and we did benefit for a long time in that manner, for up to where I think the progressive era started in 1898. Then all of a sudden, the progressive moved in and set the stage for the 20th century, which did not go well. And people capitulated to progressivism, and they forgot about Plymouth, and they went down and they had a more sophisticated method of promoting socialism. And in the 20th century, brought together two groups, the conservative warmongers as well as the liberals, to brought them together, the use of force. And we ended up with socialism, welfarism, special interests, and a concept where, especially under Woodrow Wilson, that we had a responsibility to make the world safe for democracy. Well, guess what? The world didn't become safe, and it didn't become, in their terms, democratic. It was a disaster. So if we could do one thing, maybe we could repeal Woodrow Wilson, including the income tax and the Federal Reserve System. But the 20th century I see as downhill, and the communism ended. That's the good part. But now, instead of taking advantage and getting a peace dividend in the 1990, as the Soviet system collapsed, the world was enthralled with interventionism, Keynesianism, inflationism, and all the nonsense that had been going on. But we're now at the point where it is recognized that it's doomed. It can't work. It's not going to work, and something has to replace it. That's what the Mises Institute is all about, and the many other groups that we have now, is to provide the answers to what is the replacement going to be. We don't have to think about how many tanks are we going to have to invade Washington, D.C. They have more tanks. They have bombs and drones and everything else. But believe me, ideas are much more powerful than those tanks that they don't even know how to run and won't even have the fuel to run eventually. So I would say stick with the ideas of liberty to combat the disaster of the 20th century. I think the opening salvo of this event came in the year 2000 in the financial markets. It was the NASDAQ bubble, which was predicted by the Austrian economist. It was way out of proportion, and the crash came. And most people thought, well, it came, but haven't we been doing quite well since? I don't believe so. I think it's been a disaster ever since. And the jobs leave the country. The inflation is still there. Liberties are being reduced. So I believe that event led into, the perpetuation and the desire to have even more and more bubbles. And of course, they think the bubble is the correction to the bubble phenomenon when the bubble bursts, which we all know can't work and won't work. If you have a problem of debt and too much spending and too much government, you can't correct that by just expanding government regulations and government printing in more debt. So we're facing that today, and the American people, are really in a quandary. There's a lot of anger out there. This election is different than the other elections. It's a lot worse because I think there's more confusion than ever. But everybody is angry. The people who aren't getting enough are angry. And the people who are sick and tired of paying for it are angry. And sometimes they're very confused as to who is the real cause. And I think it's demonstrated. All you have to do is listen to those debates. But when I talk about the debates and the candidates, I do have one exception. I'm not accusing them all of misunderstanding economic policy. So the people are confused and looking for it, but I think the politicians look for scapegoats. If we can just blame somebody, this would do the trick. So it's the immigrants. The immigrants are coming, and indeed it is a problem. But it is a consequence so often of economic policies. You know, it's the economic problems that we face in this country where there is a disintegration of the middle class, and there's individuals who are on the dole. There's too much welfareism, too much rewards for not working, and then too many rewards for people who come illegally. And why are they leaving? Are they leaving because of being bombed? Some, certainly that's true in Europe, but they're coming from South America and Central America because they have lousy, stinking economic policies, and they're just begging and pleading and looking for an answer. So I think that the message of liberty and the message of free markets and the message of sound money, there's a universal need for this, and to me, it's the only answer. I don't for a minute think building fences will do it. I think there has to be more interchange between those of us who understand economic policies and those others who are struggling. So there are a lot of people who are migrating and immigrating come as economic consequence. It's a bad economic problem. Then it's compounded by our bad economic problems, and people get angry and upset, and jobs go overseas, and they say, well, the solution to that is terrorists, let's raise terrorists and do all this nonsense. So it's an opening. But the Austrian School of Economics, groups like the Mises Institute, can provide the answer, and it's crucial because it's who puts it back together that counts. I think we're in a good position because nobody else has anything worthwhile. What we have to worry about is how violent and chaotic is this going to get. And that's what's really dangerous, because there could well end up with riots not only in our streets. We see the pictures already in Europe. But it's even worse in Europe because they are suffering the consequences of our foreign policy. It is true. There's a lot of people leaving these countries. Yes, you could say, well, some of them are coming in there to undermine the culture of Europe, and they certainly seem to be achieving that. But some of them are coming to escape bombs. You know, if they had good economic policies and we weren't bombing them, believe there would be a lot less immigration from the Middle East into Europe or even into this country. So the answer to this, of course, is to have sound economic policies, but we have to have a sound foreign policy as well. And foreign policy, for those of us who believe in the non-aggression principle, is that we don't have military forces spread around the world. Not only does it cause more trouble, it distracts from defense of a country, costs a lot of money. We create a lot of enemies. And what does it do? It adds on more costs. So it's a bad cycle that we're on. But Europe, I believe, is in a real mess. The whole world is in a financial situation that could come down on our heads just any time. And yet, we have the answers in the issue, with the issue of liberty, free markets, property rights, and a lot less government. That is what I think would come a long way to solving our problems. But in order for people to make use of this out of ignorance or deliberately, in order to advance the power of the state, there's a lot of demagoguery that has to go around, and a lot of fears. People act because they get scared. They get scared economically. Who's going to take care of me? And they get fearful that we're going to be attacked. And yet it's very, very difficult to get a people to look at themselves. It's hard for individuals to look at oneself to improve one's person and one's character. But this is what is very, very difficult because, of course, I've experienced that. Any suggestion that we may have had a flawed policy in foreign policy, and I did not support this endless warmongering going on. I was considered un-American and unconcerned about our troops, and literally get booed by Christian communities because the only answer to this is to drop more bombs. We need to show them how tough we are, not realizing that's the cause of the problem. You say, well, aren't there a lot of those bad guys? That's the argument we always hear. There's a lot of bad guys out there. Don't we have to get rid of them? I say, no, we don't. Did we have to do that with the Soviets? No, we ended up probably being much too close to them, rather than saying that we had to go in and do anything about it.
I'm going to stop it right there. There's still quite a bit to that speech. Again, Mises Media or Mises Media on YouTube and Mises.org. And it's titled What's Ahead, Ron Paul. Check it out, watch the full thing, and one thing, you know, we're looking at the election and the debates right now. Most of it's attacking each other, or you know, they're quotes on a certain issue, foreign policy, whatever. Then you have Donald Trump, you know, bomb them or, you know, take them out, build a wall, make Mexico pay for it, blah, blah. It's just one of those things. It's more like he still has the same philosophy, except he wants to do it without the establishment. He wants the establishment to come to him, not him do what the establishment wants. He doesn't want to be the puppet. He wants to be the puppeteer. And that's where I fear that his candidacy is going. May be wrong. And hopefully I am. If he gets, you know, the presidency, hopefully he is someone that is going to be, you know, that champion of freedom, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, when it comes to issues like national defense, definitely don't agree with, you know, we need to strengthen our... It matters what you mean by strengthen. I think to strengthen our military is to stop investing so much in foreign bases and these foreign things. Bring our troops back home. Convert more of them into Navy. Train them for Navy. Create a strong defense. And, you know, obey the Constitution. And I think we could actually have a good defense system. But that's the problem. We want the standing army around the world that was warned against these entangling alliances that we were warned against. And we talk about how we're going into debt. And you got Bernie Sanders and others talking about raising taxes. And then you have others going, we're not going to raise taxes. We're going to build all this up. We don't have anybody actually calling for real solutions, I don't believe. I have one here, an article from Reason.com. How might Libertarian Party... Oh, excuse me. I didn't want to try to download it. I just want to read it. Okay. How might Libertarian Party presidential candidates deal with Donald Trump as their GOP opponent? Gary Johnson and Austin Peterson speak. Johnson is still waiting for big money that supports small government and the Constitution to look at Trump and come to the Libertarian Party. It's not a done deal yet, but Donald Trump continues to lead in both states won and delegates collected in the Republican Party's decision-making process. His success has triggered a lot of talk from both the libertarian-leaning and from party regulars, with some dedication to certain supposed Republican commitments to things like free trade, freer immigration, and constitutionally restricted executive power, about third-party or independent candidates to rise to oppose Trump come November. There already is a third party that shares and extends many supposed GOP commitments towards free markets in the Constitution, one that is already on the ballot in a majority of states, and that could likely end up on nearly all of them, the Libertarian Party. That party will be choosing its presidential candidate at a convention in Orlando in late May. I talked this week with two of the leading contenders for that honor, former New Mexico governor as a Republican and the 2012 LP presidential candidate Gary Johnson, and former TV producer on Judge Andrew Napolitano's show Freedom Watch on the Fox Business Network, Austin Peterson. Peterson also launched the libertarian commentary and news site Libertarian Republic. The press contact for a third leading candidate, antivirus software pioneer and international man of controversy, John McAfee, did not respond to a request for comment. Peterson, the underdog, has a well-thought-out coalition-building plan for what he calls an outside coalition if it's Trump versus Clinton, hoping to pick up any available Rand Paul rump from the Republicans and even principled evangelicals and populists. Peterson thinks he's uniquely qualified among the LP prospects packed on that, since there is one big issue that divides libertarians and conservatives, in which I happen to share views with conservatives. My stance on being pro-life, if I win the nomination, I'd be the only pro-life candidate whose commitment to the issue he thinks is consistent and convincing despite Trump's current statements. Along those coalition building lines, the mercurial conservative media leader Glenn Beck has already communicated to Peterson that his support will go elsewhere if Trump wins the GOP nod. After a joint appearance on John Stossel's show with National Review editor Rich Lowry, Peterson is confident he detected a strong possibility that the magazine would continue its resolution opposition to Trump even if he's a Republican nominee, which doesn't necessarily translate into libertarian support, of course. As a showman, I admire Trump, Peterson admits. I think one of the reasons he's doing so well is his showmanship skills. He's tough. He doesn't back down. He's got the old razzle-dazzle. Peterson thinks Trump has successfully sold himself as, if not a true outsider, as an insider willing to pull down the walls of a temple that a sufficient mass of Americans think of as a corrupt and ineffectual. The establishment GOP ignored their base for so long people are tired of politics as usual, creating a voting base eager to watch the world burn, and they don't care that Trump is unprincipled. They might not agree with them on policy, but they are so incensed with the Republican establishment. Peterson sees Trump's opposition to immigration as key to his appeal. He offers a counter. though not necessarily as something that will convince a hardcore Trumpite. What he calls Ellis Island style protocols, security checks, disease checks, and if you pass them, you can come in legally. While Peterson says he's personally not afraid of the word open borders, he will say that he believes that the president should obey the Constitution and law and thus wouldn't willy-nilly try to nullify any existing immigration laws, though he says the president should have wide leeway in terms of deportation and only those who actually committed violent crimes should be deported, and that America would benefit from more worker visas, student visas, and simpler naturalization process. It should be simpler to migrate here and work. Consumers benefit from free markets and labor as much as free markets and commodities. Johnson, like the rest of us, can often only repeat silly things Trump has said in wonderment and be perplexed as to how he's catching fire. How Johnson wonders, does he expect to build a wall across the Rio Grande? How can he talk up free trade in one breath and say he'll force Apple to make its products here? Everything I thought was good about being a Republican goes out the window with Trump's talk. But Johnson has been on the presidential campaign trail as a Republican in 2012 before leaving for the LP. I was up front and personal with this group. He is attracting that believe the absolute scourge of the earth has to do with the Mexican immigration, but doesn't think that those attitudes energize a base you can win with nationally. Johnson said he'd deliberately goof on such rabid anti-immigration thinking while campaigning as a Republican in New Hampshire last time, talking about building a fence across the Canadian border only to hear, oh, come on, that's not an issue. I was a border governor, Johnson would remind such voters on his 2 terms helming New Mexico, and when I tell you Mexican immigration isn't an issue and you don't believe me, in my opinion, immigration is a boogeyman issue made up by politicians who want to scare you. Johnson says as governor of New Mexico from 95 to 2002, he asked everyone in my cabinet that interfaced with immigration, law enforcement, the courts, education, and health and human services, and they all concluded immigration from Mexico was not a net cost to the government or the people. He notes how many immigrants pay income and payroll taxes they never lay claim on, in addition to the general contribution to the public good any worker makes with his employers and customers. Johnson ran for governor with a similar sales pitch to Trump's, the successful businessman who could turn government around. So he understands his appeal on that level, but Trump's policy comments, Johnson notes, could easily be seen to arise from racism, and if you are going to vote for Trump, you are willing to take on that label though he grants most Trump supporters don't perceive their fears about immigration as rooted in race necessarily. You can read the rest of the article at reason.com. I don't even want to even go down that. I think that we have to really look for a true candidate. And again, John McAfee, says that he's going to run. Let me see if I can pull up this article here. I had it bookmarked, so I should be able to bring it right up. I think this one's it. Yes, a libertarianfuture.com 2016 Libertarian Party presidential candidates poll. Who are you currently supporting? And we have Mark Allen Friedman from Ohio. His website is votesnotforsale.com. We have Austin Peterson, austinpeterson2016.com. Gary Johnson, garyjohnson2016.com. Steve Kerbal, Steve Kerbal with a K, 2016.com. And John McAfee, 16. It's McAfee16.com. Just McAfee16.com. And according to this poll, we have Mark Allen Friedman at 2%, Austin Peterson at 31%, Gary Johnson at 46%, Steve Kerbal at 11%, and John McAfee at 9%. I'm surprised John McAfee's not higher. He's not the worst, but he's not up there like I would expect him to be. But I think Gary Johnson is just he's the one that I think more people are actually looking at right at this point. I do have this clip. Let me bring it up here. I have it on Anti-Tyranny News' Facebook page, facebook.com/Anti-Tyranny News. This one is John McAfee and the FBI finally face off on CNN. This out of the Daily Liberator. I want to get on this here. It says here, John McAfee squares off against former FBI officer Steve Rogers about the iPhone backdoor demanded by the FBI steel cage match. They're calling it. And I want to play this here. Yeah, this was a pretty short clip, so it'll be good.
The issues haven't really changed since the whole furore began. It really does come down to one of, do we give, or does the courts give the FBI the right to get into this phone, or indeed any phone? Because I think, Steve Rogers, you have to accept, if you do it once, the authorities will be back to do it again.
Richard, there has been a change, and it changes we're at war. I could buy privacy issue if this was minor criminal activity. But we're at war, and our national security is at stake here. So this is what's changed, and this is why we need the cooperation of Apple to proceed with this.
John, he's got a valid point, hasn't he?
No, he does not. This is not a matter of privacy versus security, sir. I'm certain, Mr. Rogers, I've heard a great deal about you, and good luck to you, that you are unexcelled in the area of information gathering and intelligence. I, on the other hand, have spent my entire life in computer security. This is not an issue of privacy versus security. It is an issue of how you want to access the phone. The FBI is asking for a master key. I have been in this business my entire life. There has never been a single instance of a master key or a backdoor being placed in software that was not accessed within a matter of weeks by foreign agents or black.
Give me a second as I have technical difficulties here. Okay, I'm going to get that back up here. For some reason, I had technical difficulties. So, here we go again. Let me try to get it back to the point we're at.
The area of information gathering and intelligence. I, on the other hand, have spent my entire life in computer security. This is not an issue of privacy versus security. It is an issue of how you want to access the phone. The FBI is asking for a master key. I have been in this business my entire life. There has never been a single instance of a master key or a backdoor being placed in software that was not accessed within a matter of weeks by foreign agents or black hat hackers. All right. There is simply no way, sir, no way to keep this within the FBI or within Apple. There are going to be dozens of programmers working on this thing.
You know, years ago, I was on a Navy base walking with 2 Japanese naval officers, and we were talking about technology.
I think it might have to do with the dailyliberator.com and their ads here. So let me try to get it straight out of YouTube here.
Or within Apple. There are going to be dozens of programmers working on this thing.
You know, years ago, I was on a Navy base walking with 2 Japanese naval officers, and we were talking about technology. And one of them turned to me and said, you know, while American kids are playing Nintendo, we're building them. The point is that at one point in time, the Chinese, the Russians, they're all going to get this technology. I think if we could get it first and safeguard it, yes. But we're talking about the lives of American people, not about a burglar, not about someone who's involved in minor criminal activity, but the lives of the American people. And I get the Privacy Act. Believe me, I do. But I also believe in common sense. And common sense dictates, look, if we got a way to get these terrorists, let's do it.
John? Well, Mr. Rogers, I didn't mention privacy as the issue here. I mentioned security and safety for America. The FBI was hacked a month ago by a 15-year-old boy who walked off with thousands of personnel records, including undercover agents. And you're telling me you're going to keep this safe? You can't, sir. It is not possible. We cannot keep things like this safe. We stopped doing this in the 90s
let me join
because
John.
we couldn't keep them safe.
Okay, John, but Apple has managed to keep its proprietary software safe. Apple has managed to keep its iOS safe. So let's just say you have a system whereby half the key is held by the FBI, half the key is held by Apple. What's wrong with that?
Well, here's the problem. You're saying that they've kept their operating system safe. From what? No one's trying to steal their operating system. You'd have to build the hardware for it to run on. It's not. There's no one looking for that. However, everybody's looking for a key that will unlock every iPhone.
Eventually someone's going to get that key. But I want to go back to this phrase you're using, keeping Apple safe, the system safe. I want to talk about keeping the American people safe. And if, by golly, Apple could help out, then let's do it, okay? I understand your position. I understand the privacy position. But I also understand we need to help our national security agencies.
What do you do?
But you're not helping the American people, Mr. Rogers. If in fact, I'm telling you, within a matter of weeks. Well, who cares? That's what it's all about, is helping the American people
I said, who says?
and protecting
I believe
us.
the majority of the American people want to be safe.
Let me ask you, Mr. Rogers, what do you do?
Of course we do, but we want to be safe also from hackers getting into our telephones, stealing our money, our credit cards, and our IDs, watching our daughters while they're in the bathroom. Good Lord, sir. Well, this is the problem,
and Richard,
too.
they have done that.
So what are you are weighing... I'm sorry?
Gentlemen, I'm going to, Bell, as I ask the next question.
Yes, sir.
What about this argument that says, this is the argument that if, Steve Rogers, if the US gets its way, the FBI gets its way, then soon China simply comes up with a legitimate court order and says, our court has said we want it too. Oh, and by the way, here's a court order from North Korea, such as it might be. Oh, and another court order, Germany would like it, and the UK, and before long, every country is coming up with valid court orders for Apple to do the same thing.
I believe that therein lies your national security issue. I don't believe there's a court in this country that would allow a foreign country to get that. However, saying that, Richard, I believe they'll get this information and this technology before they need a court order.
John, the final word to you, sir. Do you accept that if this goes all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court votes that Apple loses, the FBI wins, Apple has to provide the necessary software, has to do, under the rule of law, that which it's ordered to do?
Well, then that would be a tragic day for America, sir. Mr. Rogers continually says, well, we will at least have the software first before the foreign agencies get it. Well, if you don't have the key, nobody gets it, and we're safe from the foreign agencies. There are hundreds of millions of people using the iPhone. We are all at risk if the FBI gets its way. And there are many ways that they can get access to this. I've offered for free to give them access to the phone. There are tons of ways to do it, sir, and if the FBI does not have the capability, then my heart is saddened.
How about we work together? How about there is a happy medium somehow, some way? Maybe the FBI and you all could work together.
Gentlemen, I thank you both for joining me, and I think that we can all agree
Okay, now, this is something that John McAfee has come out and said multiple times, that he will give the FBI access to that phone because you can get physical access to the phone and break into it. What they're asking is a master key. What a master key would do is give remote access to these phones by hackers. That's the big difference. Well, you know, people are like, well, if he can hack into the phone, why don't, you know, what's the difference between that and a back door? That's the difference. If you have the phone, you can create the hacking software to bypass the security measures and get into that phone. So if your phone gets lost, luckily, if you do it fast enough, they got on the iPhone a thing where you can erase the phone, erase all the stuff off of it, remotely find your phone. If you get it stolen and you access that on the web fast enough, again, you can do that. Now, you know, this former FBI, you know, we can work together. He's been calling for it. They haven't, you know, agreed to it. They keep calling for this master key, again, which gives remote access to iPhones. And it's, you know, pretty misleading what the FBI is trying to do. I really think so. So, I had this other article here. This one was what, if I can find it here. I think I have it here. Let me check my bookmarks. I might have put it there. Maybe I don't. Huh. Well, I had another article that was talking about the FBI coming out saying that it was an accident that they locked themselves out of the phone and turned off the iCloud, which seems extremely, extremely hard. Being an iPhone, user, because I do like the ease of access and the security features of iPhone. I choose to carry iPhone, even though I have problems with Apple. We are stuck in an age of technology, and doing what I do, I need technology at my hands. And unfortunately, we're in a place that we do it, but also, again, it also gives us freedom where we can access information and be alert on things. I still can't believe I can't find that. Because, an accident, it's really hard for me to believe that. It just, something about it does not seem right that they could call it an accident. Just don't believe it. I really don't. Now, let me get into this last article here. Maybe second to last here. If I can cover both in the time, I will. This one, from Truth to Media. I'll just play the clip instead of reading it. Just transcript, basically. I'll play this clip from Truth to Media Reality Check with Ben Swan. And this is covering what a judge has said about the FBI and Apple, saying that the 200-year-old law does not apply to this. So let's just get into this.
In favor of Apple in its battle against the FBI over unlocking the phone of a drug dealer. Why is it important? Because the judge says the FBI cannot use a 200-year-old law in order to gain access to your phone. The same law they're using to try to access the phone of the San Bernardino shooter. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Definitely a major development in the battle between the FBI and Apple. The Justice Department is demanding that Apple create software to give the FBI access to an iPhone belonging to one of the San Bernardino shooters. Apple, as we've told you, is pushing back, saying that the technology the FBI is asking for does not exist, and that forcing them to create a backdoor to one iPhone would mean a backdoor to every iPhone. But the real debate here, can the federal government force a private company to act on their behalf, even in the case of national security? That is the center question in this debate. The government says it can, and its argument is actually based upon a 1787 law called the All Writs Act. That law states that government has, quote, all writs necessary or appropriate in aid of their respective jurisdictions and agreeable to the usages and principles of law, end quote. According to the New Yorker, in 1977, the feds actually used the All Writs Act to force a New York telephone company to tap phones. In that case, the FBI wanted New York Telephone, which was already helping it to set up a tap in an illegal gambling sting, to let it use some spare cables that were physically in the same terminal box as those hooked up to the suspect's phone. The telephone company told the FBI to get its own wires and string them into the apartment of one of the alleged gamblers some other way. When the FBI objected that the suspects might spot the rigged cables, the court agreed that it could legitimately ask the telephone company for its technical help and facilities. But remember, the FBI at that time was not asking New York Telephone to design a new kind of cable. In Apple's case, the FBI says it was asking for help under the All Writs Act. But federal magistrate judge James Orenstein in Brooklyn, who sits in the Eastern District of New York, he says the All Writs Act does not permit a court order for companies to pull encrypted data off of a customer's phone or tablet. The judge wasn't ruling, by the way, on the San Bernardino case. He was actually ruling on a case involving a Brooklyn drug dealer. But what is significant is that the FBI used the same claim of the All Writs Act. In his 50-page opinion, the judge called the FBI's claim absurd. He said that none of the factors that he reviewed in the case justified imposing on Apple the obligation to assist the government's investigation against its will. And he also says that to do so would undermine the more general protection against tyranny that the founders believed required the careful separation of governmental powers. The FBI says it will appeal the ruling in the drug dealer case, but what you need to know is that that ruling now creates precedent. The precedent here, that the All Writs Act does not give the government the power to demand that a firm build software to undo a security feature that it built in the first place to protect a phone's encrypted data. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
Okay, now we see the precedent set. Now, you know, how far is this going to go? Is it going to make it to the Supreme Court? And what is the Supreme Court going to do? We're sitting with one less person on the Supreme Court. We don't have, you know, any clear candidate yet, unless, you know, Trump gets power and actually does, you know, put Andrew Napolitano in. And he actually gets put in, gets confirmed. You know, where is this going to play out? How is it going to play out? And I think that there's enough evidence out there to prevent them from being able to do this, but we'll see. And encryption's really key for keeping data safe, you know. Encryption is not unbeatable. What it does is makes it extremely hard. And depending on the type of encryption, how hard, how long it could take. Backdoors make it easier. Now, I want to cover one last article here. And this was out of news.yahoo.com. Former Google CEO Schmidt to head new Pentagon Innovation Board. That's right, you're hearing it. And I've warned about these people. This guy is one of the people that really, really makes me extremely nervous of him being involved in even Google or the Pentagon or, you know, AI, which he's involved in, and his ideas about controlling what people read and see to prevent extremism, and basically saying that anything that causes people to get angry should be shut down. Says here, Eric Schmidt, the former chief executive officer of Google, will head a new Pentagon advisory board amid aimed at bringing Silicon Valley innovation and best practices to the U.S. military defense Secretary Ash Carter said on Wednesday. Carter unveiled the new Defense Innovation Advisory Board with Schmidt during the annual RSA Cybersecurity Conference in San Francisco, saying it would give the Pentagon access to the brightest technical minds focused on innovation. Schmidt, now the executive chairman of Alphabet Inc., which owns Google, parent company of Google, it says here, said the board would help bridge what he called a clear gap between how U.S. military and the technology industry operate, meaning bring him under state control. Schmidt also said he saw, that's my opinion, Schmidt also said he saw the group looking for ways to use new technologies to solve new and emerging problems. The board is Carter's latest effort to kickstart innovation across the U.S. military by building bridges to the technology industry. The U.S. Defense Chief announced the board's creation on Wednesday during his third trip to Silicon Valley. since taking office just over a year ago. It had been 20 years since the U.S. Defense Secretary visited Silicon Valley. So why, Google comes out to support Apple, they do this crap with the person from their parent company, Alphabet. I am former chief officer at Google, and the guy I've warned you about for a while. We're not going to, or if we do not innovate and be competitive, we're not going to be the military that the country needs and deserves, Carter told reporters. We should have done it a while ago. Carter has argued forcefully for spending more on science and technology to maintain the U.S. military's competitive edge over Russia and China as they expand their militaries. Carter and Schmidt said they would choose up to, I think it says 12 individuals to serve on the board, focusing on people who have led large private and public organizations and excelled at identifying and adopting new technology concepts. Smith told reporters that he had a list of possible members but had not yet contacted them. The Pentagon said at first meeting could take place as early as April, modeled on the Defense Business Board, which provides advice on best business practices from the private sector. The new panel is intended to help the Pentagon become more innovative and adaptive in developing technology and doing business. Members will draw on their experience in Silicon Valley to advise on rapid prototyping, interactive product development, complex data analysis, the use of mobile and cloud applications, and organizational information sharing, Pentagon said. Remind you also that Google Alphabet Company bought Boston Dynamics, part of DARPA, making all these crazy robot stuffs, also integrating Google's AI with all that. Just saying. Little editor's note there for me. Quote, the secretary is always looking at ways to keep the department thinking fresh, bringing in new ideas, bringing in new voices, and he sees this as another opportunity to do that, said a senior defense official. Again, that was at news.yahoo.com. You can also find it on the Drudge Report until it disappears off Drudge Report. And, when you look at a lot of the fearful news anymore, it makes people go, our future isn't bright. But, there's people like Jeffrey Tucker and, Lou Rockwell and Ron Paul that also point out how, we also are living in an age where we're learning how to use things to our advantage to free us. They can build whatever structures they want, but if the minds of people start, being freed from this construct of, you are basically a robot for their needs and their wants and their wealth. And we start looking at opportunities to free ourselves from that and ways to do that. I think we become a freer society just for the simple fact people won't go along with the system anymore. But when we do look at the political side, I believe that we need to also look at things like the Constitution as steps to eliminate government control. Don't let government get to the point where they can become a destructive and murdering force. And I think we are getting to the edge of that if we don't watch it. And that's why I warn about any of the candidates out there. What are their true intentions? And are they going to create a more authoritarian system? It might keep others out of your way, out of your life for now, but those laws will eventually be used against you when, they get bored or you get people in power that have a hate for this country, which many people think that Obama has. I don't know. But we know there are people that do not like, freedom because they don't know or they don't want to try to free themselves in a way to build your own business, build your own name. And they feel that, well, I should be able to go to McDonald's and work and make a living wage. Well, yeah, as maybe a high school student, that should be a living wage. When you still have, people helping out, paying bills and putting food in the fridge, and you can learn how to save your money and maybe go to college and the old system, because there was something where you had to build yourself. And some people aren't willing to build themselves. There are people that